All right. Now let's talk a little bit about plantation life a little bit. Understand that when we think about the South and slaves, not everybody in the South owned slaves. In fact, on average, there's about 2 slaves per family on average. All right. There's something like 1,700 total plantations that have more than 50 slaves. But you can see in this pie graph that's a really small amount. Again, on average, anyway, most families have anywhere from 1 to 4 slaves. All right, and those types of situations, the slaves become part of the family. They work in that, work and live in the house. They help outside. Small Yemen, white Yemen farmers, you know, they have small plantations or small farms that they might help alongside with. Okay, so again, you can see here, most is 2 to 4, really 105,000 families owned anywhere from 2 to 4, and again 1,700 were owned more than 100 or more. Okay, and here's just some pictures of slaves at the time of the Civil War, and just looking at the conditions that they lived in. All right, now when we think about the South, we get this image of the Southern Belle, this this image of Tara and Gone with the Wind. But understand that with the planter aristocracy, excuse me, there's power. They controlled politics. They controlled society. They saw themselves as aristocrats, just as in like a feudal society in Europe. All right. But most of their wealth was rather recently acquired. So it's not like they're not most. I should say most of their families weren't wealthy for a long period of time. You know, it's a rather short period of time that they had this wealth. Okay, growing crops became profitable, but as competitive and risky as the industry in the North. So a lot of the families, you know, would fluctuate in terms of their wealth. All right. So we look at this plantation reality or myth. You know, there's this honor code amongst the white males. You know, this code of chivalry that obligated them to defend their honor. You know, this ethical ideal and bravery that they gave out with their public appearance of dignity and authority. You know, they're going to challenge anybody who challenges them. You know, they don't like to be, you know, that they have their ideals to be challenged. They don't like to be put down as living a sinful life with slaves. You know, on the other side of things, you have the Southern lady, the Southern belle, you know, whose lives are centered around the home. They do very little in public activity. They don't earn money whatsoever. The white men are more dominant, and the women are very subordinate in the North than in the North. Okay. You know, so a lot of these Southern belles, you know, they have less educational opportunities. You know, a lot of them just raise money and flaunt it. You know, there is a higher birth rate and as well as a higher infant mortality rate in the South than in the North, though. Okay. Here's what a real Georgia plantation kind of looks like, and you can see it's broken down by the different crops. You know, the rice, cotton, corn, cane, potatoes, peas, and other crops. Okay. Now, in the home of the elite, you have, again, this image of Aunt Jemima or the Mammy. You know, and again, this is a Hollywood image that comes about with the South. And in some ways it's true, in some ways it's not. Okay, you know, older black slave women did stay home and take care and raise the kids because the women of the house were out kind of going to balls and flaunting the wealth of the family. Okay. In terms of the slave family, obviously you have more unity. Slaves are going to create this deep bond amongst each other, and if not broken up, they will stay together for a long period of time. And we still see it today in African American cultures of tight, you know, bigger families, with aunts, uncles, grandmas, grandfathers, blah blah blah, um, than we would in maybe a Caucasian family. All right. Here's just a good example of a sale, a ledger from example of a guy named John White, kind of just breaking down how much people are bought for and how much they're sold for. And you see this person, bought high, sold high. Some people bought low, sold high, vice versa. Okay. Now, what's important to understand is in America we have this growing trend that has supported slavery for a long period of time. All right, it first started with the U.S. Constitution with the 3/5 Compromise and the Fugitive Slave Clause. All right, which then said, eventually by 1808, slave trade will be abolished. Okay. By 1793, you had the Fugitive Slave Act. All right, which basically said any runaways that found in the North must be returned. By 1850, we're going to have a stronger Fugitive Slave Act, which allows the South to even go north into towns and capture either free blacks to replace the runaway slaves or to capture the runaway slaves. All right. But if you look at the history of slavery, you see by the 1780s you had this first anti-slavery society. By 1804, slavery is eliminated from the last northern state. By 1807, you have this legal termination of slave trade. 1820s, you have newly independent countries in South America. 1833, slavery is abolished by the British. 1844, the French. 1861, Russia. So by the time of the Civil War, America is the last country in the world to have slavery as a legal system. And that's a little embarrassing considering we're flaunting ourselves, even at this point, as being the standard for democracy. Understand, though, slavery was less efficient in the U.S. than anywhere else, though. There's a high cost of keeping slaves from escaping, all right? So the goal was to raise the exit cost, all right? So they're going to hire slave patrols. They're going to create these Southern black codes to try to limit the opportunities that slaves might have if they were to run away. They're going to cut off the toe or the foot. Even the front half of the foot at the toe line will be cut off to prevent slaves from running. All right, last but not least, we're talking about slave resistance and uprisings. When we talk about slave resistance, there's a number of ways that slaves are going to create their culture of resistance, I should say. First, you have like this Sambo, which is this idea of the innocent, laughing black man character. Bulging eyes, thick lips, big smiles. The stereotypes that we think of. All right, but understand those stereotypes were actually created by the slaves themselves as a way to mock their white owners. They'd say, "Yes, sir. Yes, massa. Anything you say, massa. Happy day, massa." Those types of attitudes and responses by the slaves were a way to really make fun of their owners. All right. Here's some classic pictures. All right. There'll be times where the slaves will just refuse to work hard, and what they'll do, they'll actually create these isolated acts of sabotage where, for example, they'll sing songs, and their work songs will be slow beats. But what they're doing, again, is they're mocking their owners and into the fact that the owners think that they have happy slaves. They're working hard. Look at them. They're singing songs while they work. But what the owners don't realize is that they're singing these slow-paced songs, that slow down the amount of work, and that they don't accomplish as much. But meanwhile, the whites are thinking, "Oh, look, I got my slaves in line. They're working hard." All right. You also have eventually the development of the Underground Railroad, led by people like Harriet Tubman and others, where they'll escape to the north and even as far as north as Canada. All right. You have a number of runaway attempts, and obviously here's some slave ads about runaways. All right. Then you have, for the Underground Railroad, you have different signals and this whole complex system of helping runaways, slaves, get free to Canada. All right. And then last but not least, you have slave rebellions, and we'll talk about a couple of them, but the two most important ones are obviously Nat Turner's rebellion. You also have Denmark Vesey's, I believe it's Denmark, Vesey's. You'll also have Gabriel Turner's rebellion, the Stono Rebellion, which is early history. But you have a series of rebellions that will occur that will help show slave resistance. All right. Oh, Gabriel Prosser, excuse me, and Denmark Vesey. Yes, I'm correct. And obviously Nat Turner. Okay. Now, the culture of slavery. What will be developed from the slaves, obviously, is you have a new form of religion called Black Christianity. Today, it's called the AME Church, African Methodist Episcopalian. All right, where it's more emotional worship services. Negro spirituals are sung. It's very upbeat and lively church service. You have new languages such as the Pidgin and the Gula languages, which are kind of created by the slaves themselves. It's a mixture of different tribes, African tribes. Again, I already mentioned this. You have the nuclear family with the extended kin links, where like you have the whole family living together, supporting each other. Obviously, you have this development of music. Music becomes very, very important, and obviously, we've have adapted their music to create, country, to create jazz and things like that. All right. Now, slavery is going on, and you have the abolition movement in the North that's saying it's bad. Well, the South has to defend themselves, and they're going to create a series of pro-slavery propaganda, trying to sell the idea that the slave is better off with the whites, that they are being treated, they have a place to sleep, they have food to eat, that they're better off in America with them than they are in their homeland, uncivilized, wearing like loin cotton, pants or whatever, hunting with a spear. All right, and that's it. And we'll go into further detail later.